Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asban Team level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Well, here we are, the end of an era for Doctor Who in more ways than one. Just as soon as it started, the 60th anniversary trilogy of specials has bowed out with the explosive and dramatic episode The Giggle. This was always a hotly anticipated episode, tasked with wrapping up the 14th Doctor's short life, along with celebrating the show's extensive history by reintroducing the celebrated and legendary villain the Celestial Toymaker from all the way back in 1966. It's an episode with familiar faces, terrifying villains, and the most controversial regeneration in Doctor Who's long history. But is it good? Well, as always, that's what I'm here to find out. So without any further ado, let's take a deep dive into The Giggle. And hey, at least this video will probably be received a little bit better than my last one. The Giggle kicks off in 1925 Soho with a very unsettling scene of a man meeting the sinister Toymaker, who is acting all over the top with this awfully fake German accent trying to oversell all these toys. It's a very strong establishing scene because it immediately shows that the Toymaker is a creepy and deceitful presence with a threatening aura. I mean, hell, the guy literally implies he killed a woman to make the Stooky Bill doll, which is such a strong way to hint towards villainy. I think it's also pretty creepy when you consider that in his other appearances, the Toymaker often turned people into dolls like this. So he's always capable of this evil manipulation of people's own bodies. I also appreciate how the opening gives us that very quick look at the creation of television itself. It's not a full-blown celebrity historical, which is good because there's not much depth there unless you bring back a character like The Wire. So it's just a nice way to both introduce the villain and the vehicle for him to affect the events in the present day, tying it to real human history in a way only Doctor Who can ever really do. At the end of Wild Blue Yonder, the Doctor and Donna return to Earth and reunited with the eternally lovely Wilfred Mott, only for the whole world to descend into chaos as everyone went mad. The Giggle picks up immediately after this ending as the trio try to navigate the hectic streets of London, where everyone is practically rioting and fighting with each other, with some fantastically disorienting and dizzying directing, with all this intense conflict and destruction happening. A big problem with Doctor Who's recent Earth stories is that they all feel so detached from what's happening on the ground level. We don't get to see how the events affect everyday people, but now the everyday people are the events, so it's crucial for us to get that perspective of how this screen transmitted delusion is tearing the world apart, especially considering we spend the rest of the episode elsewhere. It's a memorable scene to start things off, and it also highlights the social and political commentary of the concept, since everyone suddenly thinks they're right and everything else is some sort of conspiracy against them.
Not me! I've always been right!
As the world has become more connected through screens and the internet, our innate tribalism has been amplified to the extreme. Every issue, big or small, becoming some huge us versus them situation filled with self-righteousness and ego. There's a great Kurtz's art video about it I suggest watching. The Toymaker loves this decline in social sensibilities and takes advantage of it. So he weaponizes humanity's tribalism against itself, and it's a great example of matching social commentary to an existing villain's goals of meddling and manipulating people. Because the more we destroy each other, the more fun he can have. Despite the world descending into the average day on Twitter, unit members are able to survive the effects of the infectious Giggle because of their Z-Dex devices, which are basically just magic armbands that exist solely to prevent the side characters being affected. It's a literal plot device, and it's fine, it does what it needs to do. It also gives us the biggest return of them all, as iconic series 1 to 4 news anchor Trinity Wells rants about Z-Dexes on an Alex Jones style show.
I am anti-Z-Dex!
Damn, how the mighty have fallen. This, along with a joke about the government leaders, is a way of further showing the far-reaching effects of the Giggle, how it's even affecting people in power and people with great influence, only serving to worsen tensions. After all, it's kind of what we've seen so much of in the last decade or so, governments and broadcasters becoming more and more blatant with their agendas and appealing more to tribalism. So it's the typical Doctor Who method of framing these very real issues through the lens of a goofy science fiction end-of-the-world plot. It also shows how even good people can become hateful and radicalized, like we see as Kate Stewart deactivates her Z-Dex and suddenly becomes very confrontational against the Doctor for almost no reason, paranoid of his nature as an alien. Gemma Redgrave does such a fantastic job here, turning Kate into this genuinely unhinged person acting so very unlike herself because the effects of the Giggle are that strong. She also accuses Shirley of walking around, implying she believes the wheelchair is some sort of lie, which is a clear way of addressing a lot of people's black and white worldviews of wheelchair users. Actor Ruth Madeley suffers from the birth defect spina bifida, which causes spinal development issues and means she has to use a wheelchair despite still being able to stand to some extent, like we see here. Not every wheelchair user is paralysed or completely unable to use their legs, so I just appreciate that little touch of showing that, and how people unfairly group together all wheelchair users as if they can never even stand for 2 seconds. I do like the moment as the Doctor calls out humanity for being bigoted and self-righteous even without the giggle. We've always been a tribalistic and conflict-prone species, so the giggle isn't an excuse for the dark side of humanity, and it's consistent for the Doctor to point that out. Even though he loves Earth and its people, he never forgets how dangerous they are and how much evil they cause on a regular basis. It was something especially prominent in the first Russell T Davies era, so I'm not at all surprised it happens again here, as this reminder to take accountability and not hide bigotry behind excuses. But that all being said, I do find the whole screen transmitted message idea a bit flimsy. The narrative suggests that a new satellite launched and essentially completed some sort of connectivity puzzle to allow the giggle to manifest, but the logic around this never really makes a whole lot of sense. The toy maker somehow planting his laugh in the first ever television recording, and then somehow subliminally burning that image into every screen ever made, or something like that. Yeah, like I said, it's a bit flimsy, but for once I can forgive it as being the usual Doctor Who plot shenanigans, and it's not too contrived that it takes me out of it. It's a decent way to tie things together and amplify all the madness going on. With the world in chaos, there's only one organisation still holding it all together from their giant Avengers Tower. UNIT. I really appreciate how Kate simply hugs the Doctor when she first sees him, having become so lost and helpless without his guidance in the last 2 days of humanity destroying itself.
How do we fight the human race?
For once, Kate is severely out of her depth. She's not used to something so normal like this. It's not like all these violent humans are Zygons in disguise or clones. They're just regular human people being driven insane, something outside of UNIT's usual mandate, and it's such a great challenge for UNIT to have to face. Although it's a shame we don't really get to see too much of them actually dealing with it on a personal level. However, that all being said, I really like how UNIT is presented in this story. Much like the Star Beast, they're an established force with proper resources and weaponry. Even having this impressive base which looks amazing with all its sleek desks and screens is a far cry from the quaint and simple UNIT HQ of Classic Who. Even having their own robot sidekick just chilling in the corner handling their computer systems. It all feels like the logical progression of UNIT within the world of Doctor Who as they've grown more and more prominent. Although it is weird how they've somehow managed to build an entire skyscraper like a year after the last HQ got blown up. That's an impressive turnaround time. Either that or Power of the Doctor was insurance fraud. I feel like the Star Beast and the Giggle intentionally introduced a lot of moving parts ready for a UNIT spin-off show. There's a full cast established now, with Kate as the leader, Shirley as the science advisor, Mel as the hacking field agent, Ibrahim as the hands-on soldier, and the Flinks as the quirky alien robot guy giving missions. It's the absolute perfect framework for a 2000s team-based sci-fi action procedural akin to Torchwood. And hey, Donna can even show up too, given she manages to negotiate a cushy 120k salary with 5 weeks holiday. Good for her, these days that might get you half a Freddo. As the Doctor enters UNIT, he meets a familiar face.
Melanie, hello!
Mel time! It's Mel time.
This, of course, is Mel Bush, a companion from the 6th and 7th Doctor's era, and obviously she had returned for a brief cameo at the end of Power of the Doctor, but this is her proper return to the show in a significant capacity, reuniting her with the Doctor after they parted ways in Dragonfire, which, hot take, isn't actually that bad of a story. Mel has never exactly been a character that has been highly requested to return, and in a way that makes me appreciate her reappearance all the more, because it's a bit unconventional. Like, it's not Susan or Joe Grant or anything like that. We get a brief school reunion moment as the two former TARDIS travellers catch up, giving us a quick little bit of exposition about their past adventures to clue in new viewers whilst not dragging down the reunion for those who already know Mel. Since the episode has so much going on, they can't focus too much on Mel and what she's up to now, but I think this scene is a short but sweet moment to reintroduce the character and show how she's picked herself up after leaving the Doctor. She doesn't contribute a huge amount to the wider episode, but it makes sense why she's there, and she actually gets to use her computer skills, unlike her time in Classic Who, where she just kind of stood around screaming all the time and getting kidnapped.
We're 1 degree and 27 minutes out.
It redeems the character in a way, allowing her to realise more of her potential, and I really look forward to her appearing again in Series 14 and getting even more stuff to do.
Because every single one of you is fantastic.
According to Doctor Who Unleashed, Stooky Bill was one of Russell T Davies' starting points for the Giggle, since it's this terrifying and creepy puppet serving as the very first televised image in human history. It immediately creates an unsettling and memorable visual, but the writer knew the idea of evil puppets could only go so far. Therefore, he developed the idea of the Celestial Toymaker being involved in Stooky Bill's presence, which creates a fantastic link building to that legendary figure. Indeed, during the initial chaos of the world going mad, the Doctor bumps into the Toymaker without recognising him, just assuming he's another weird, insane person. However, after the Doctor and Donna travel back to find Stooky Bill, the Time Lord begins to piece things together, and I adore their first proper encounter inside the shop. The villain just overwhelming the Doctor with all these balls.
And now, everybody loves the balls.
Neil Patrick Harris is so fantastic as this hammy, campy villain in the story. I wasn't familiar with his work going into this episode, so I really didn't know what to expect, but I absolutely wasn't disappointed. He dances and struts through the story, always mocking the Doctor and taunting him, never taking anything seriously, but not in a cringy Deadpool way. The Toymaker knows he's in control and can do anything he wants to, so he can easily swagger around and make all these one-liners and wink at everyone. It's like the character himself knows he's in a Doctor Who story, so purposefully hammers it all up in the most fun way possible. Despite his legacy as a big villain, the Toymaker was never an ultra serious and dramatic one. He was always a bit petulant and childish, so Patrick Harris's take isn't a significant departure from the norm. He genuinely feels like a more contemporary version of the character, and nothing highlights that more than his cheesy dance scene as he bursts into Unit HQ with Spice Up Your Life playing. This is obviously a bit of a callback to Sound of Drums and Last of the Time Lords, and it has the same level of pure goofy insanity as those two very iconic moments. I love the frantic editing as he keeps appearing all over the place. The protagonist barely even able to register his presence before he's gone again. Obviously it's a comedic showcase of how unhinged and chaotic the larger-than-life villain is, but it's also a brilliant way to show more of his abilities to manipulate the very physics of our world. Not only can he summon these doors to teleport around, he's also able to turn people into bouncy balls and bullets into flowers he can American Beauty himself in. It's the kind of absurd yet terrifying scene that can only really work in the wonderfully wacky world of Doctor Who. No other show could get away with something so silly whilst maintaining a sense of serious stakes. The Doctor and his friends are absolutely helpless and unable to do anything against Toymaker as he dances around like he owns the place. This brilliant frenzied show of strength from the villain. However, as goofy and campy as the Toymaker is, he also has a very serious and sinister side, emphasised by the Doctor's reaction to this foe, telling Donna to go back to the TARDIS, something he never does, so you know things are real. You can really sense the seriousness in Tennant's expression and acting, and I appreciate the quick flashes to the original Toymaker of Classic Who, reminding you of their history of one another, just like when the Doctor explains the past to Donna, a brief catch up for the 95% of the audience who have no idea who this guy is. I mean, come on, let's not pretend that Celestial Toymaker is actually a good story. It actually kind of sucks, to be honest, but I digress. It's very hard to balance a villain's campiness and seriousness, but Russell T Davies and Neil Patrick Harris combine perfectly to achieve this. The Toymaker is a serious threat because he's so sadistically playful and campy. That's part of why he's so significant and terrifying. I love all his dark, evil smirks throughout the episode, all these knowing looks of what he plans to do with the Doctor and break him down. He has this unpredictability at his core that feeds his evil nature, and that really makes him shine. You never know what he's capable of. I also like his otherworldliness being shown as he can constantly change his clothes, because he's not limited to our own physics. He can just do whatever he wants, step wherever he wants, dress in whatever way he wants. It's just really amazing storytelling. A strong example of the Toymaker's more serious side is when he traps the Doctor and Donna in a never-ending maze of doors and hallways, a creepy liminal space making the characters feel so lost and unable to rationalise anything they're seeing. Within moments, the episode has gone from playfully camp to unsettling with real horror vibes, a perfectly executed tonal shift giving us those amazing scenes of creepy dolls as the main duo are split up. I was very critical of Wild Blue Yonder's body horror and use of uncanny visual effects because I thought it was a little bit too goofy and hard to find scary. However, this time around it absolutely works, like when we see the man from the beginning whose head is now attached to a puppet as a consequence of losing the Toymaker's game. The green screening and CGI is again far from perfect here, but it's still a genuinely creepy and unnatural visual that works fantastically, especially when it's the Doctor's own face. That's the kind of campy horror I wanted from Wild Blue Yonder, and I just love it so much here. It's so effective. It's the same as Donna meets Stooky Bill's abandoned family in this old attic room. Stooky Sue is so creepy as she moves on her own, giving Tim Burton-esque vibes with the uncanny effects and movements. There's just something so unnerving about it all. I can guarantee some kids are getting serious nightmares from these dolls, especially all the babies descending from the ceiling as Stooky Sue taunts Donna in rhymes. Now that's how you do PG horror. When the Doctor and Donna reunite, the Toymaker pulls them into a puppet show to taunt our main protagonist, highlighting how all the Moffat-era companions died under the Doctor's protection. I love this scene for a variety of reasons. Not only is it a good recap of sorts, filling in those gaps for lapsed fans, but it also shows the Doctor's deep denial when it comes to those deaths. Moffat's refusal to allow his companions to die has long been one of the main criticisms of his era. It's something even I've made a video essay about in the past. He tried to eat his cake and have it too, and yes, by the way, that's the actual proverb. Moffat wanted all these big dramatic companion deaths, but he also hated ending their stories for good and always wanted some sort of asterisk to keep them around in some form. However, here it's revealed to be a genuine in-universe character flaw of the Doctor, who desperately tries to justify all their deaths and explain them away, which is such a great example of taking a writing flaw from the show's past and acknowledging it within the fiction of the text itself. Each time the Doctor suggests these cop-out endings as if it changes the facts of their death, and the Toymaker mocks it for the delusion it is.
Oh, well, that's all right then.
It doesn't matter how they died or how they escaped death, they still did die, and the Doctor needs to accept that. And then the Toymaker brings up the flux, and there's no way for the Doctor to dance around that, especially because of how fresh that guilt is. I just love this whole scene so much. It's written and performed phenomenally, as both the villain taunting the Doctor to get a rise out of him, whilst also exploring the emotional aftermath of those previous tragic events, emphasising all these things the Doctor has been bottling up. Indeed, a large part of this episode is about how the Doctor is running on fumes and crumbling under the weight of everything that has happened to him since he first left Gallifrey, having never stopped to think about what he has done and what he has seen. This was something Donna brought up at the end of the Star Beast and Wild Blue Yonder, but it's a lot more explicit here as she challenges the Doctor's very nature of always running forwards without ever taking that time to dwell on things like his companion deaths and major events like the Time War and the Flux. This idea of never stopping is something that has come up many times before in New Who, exploring how the lead character tries to bury their trauma and emotions by distracting themselves with more adventures and dramatic escapades. Donna wonders just how much more the Doctor can take, and we see him straining under that weight as he blames himself for accidentally summoning the Toymaker the episode before, becoming overwhelmed by his mistakes and responsibilities. He knows it's not his fault. He didn't know the consequences of just a bit of salt at the edge of the universe. But he has just been holding in all this guilt and shame for so long, he can't help but doubt himself. This sense of vulnerability and humility is one of the biggest reasons the 14th Doctor is different from the 10th. These moments where he acknowledges his flaws and admits them, rather than letting his ego and godly powers get to his head.
Take away the toys. What am I?
As a character, he's very lost, and on his last legs, he needs Donna to prop him up and reassure him to keep him going and eventually heal him. But we'll get to all that stuff later on when I talk about the bi-regeneration stuff, because oh boy, it's coming. After the companion puppet show, the Doctor challenges the Toymaker to a simple game of cards. Although I do find it a little bit weird how naive he gets about the Toymaker cheating, he's all like, oh no, he'd never cheat, he physically can't cheat at games. Meanwhile, the whole point of the Toymaker in every appearance is how much he cheats within the rules of the games. He always finds some sly loophole to punish his victims, like he does here by not taking a card from the top of the deck like the Doctor did. So our main protagonist is definitely being a little bit silly by not anticipating such a pro-gamer move from the biggest trickster in the Doctor universe. Anyway, it's during this card game that we get some excellent exposition regarding the villain's entrance into this universe. The Toymaker boasts about all his recent victories, even defeating the Master and sealing him inside his comically shiny Max Capricorn gold tooth. Damn, I bet that won't become relevant ever again. I guess the Master just really likes his red fingernailed saviours. Anyway, this scene continues to plant ominous seeds for future villains, much like the Meep mentioning a boss back in the Star Beast, something that has been implied to come back up again in Series 14. Davis has stated that he wants to introduce and reintroduce more godlike figures into the show, so this time we have the tease of a threat even the Toymaker doesn't dare play against. This is villain building 101, something even more deadly and dangerous coming down the line from the villain we're facing right now. After all, as the saying goes, there's always a bigger fish. There's been the usual speculation that this is a villainous Time Lord like Omega or Rassilon, but the Toymaker has never feared Time Lords in any of his stories, and even in this episode he boasts about defeating the Guardians, who were even more powerful than the Time Lords themselves. So if there's any existing villain that fits this mold, I think it probably has to be Fenric, who is known for waiting and playing his own games. So that's your spicy Harbo prediction of the week. After spicing up the lives of the Doctor and Unit, the Toymaker takes control of the big sci-fi cannon the heroes previously used to blow up the satellite from earlier.
Now we can all have some fun.
I feel like this is where the episode starts to falter a bit and suffer from being a standalone episode instead of a multi-part story. The ending comes up just as the story finds its groove, so instead we get a big monologue, the Doctor offering for the Toymaker to travel with him and play games across the cosmos. It's the typical 10th Doctor style fake out of wondering, oh, will the villain actually just see the error of their ways? But they never do, and the Toymaker doubles down on his threats and explains how much he loves all the games humanity plays. Again, it's a great motivation, but it ends up a little unexplored here because there's so much else going on in the episode. We definitely needed more time with the Toymaker to flesh him out better, maybe connect all 3 stories through him or have it as a more specific trilogy. Instead, he just shoots the Doctor with a giant laser beam, trying to force the regeneration so he can play the next game with the next Doctor. I love how the scene begins, Donna and Mel refusing to let the Doctor regenerate alone like 10 did. The music swells up all emotional and the 14th Doctor accepts his fate, the words Alonzi a lot more optimistic than I don't want to go. So it feels like a nice conclusion for the character arc of this face of the Doctor, embracing change this time around and letting go. It could have been a really strong moment, but it's just a shame that this is all another fake out regeneration akin to the Meta-Crisis Doctor in the Stolen Earth. Yeah, all the regeneration energy just disappears and the Doctor's companions pull his arms to unveil the 15th Doctor. Wow, I guess his arms really were too long. Yes, it's now finally time to talk about bigeneration. The big groundbreaking change to the lore this episode introduces as the 15th Doctor splits off from the 14th Doctor like an amoeba. This was something that leaked a long time ago and I was very worried going in. I thought it was going to be something even worse than the Timeless Child storyline, but it does seem like it simply looked worse on paper. That being said, I'm still not a huge fan of the idea. It's very self-indulgent.
You're mean.
I do like the idea of a different style of multi-Doctor story though, using a future incarnation instead of a past one, like we see here.
I'm the Doctor.
And I'm the Doctor.
It's a unique idea, I just wish it had been the 15th Doctor just coming in from the future. I don't think it needed all these extra lore shenanigans of bigeneration. It's implied that the Toymaker somehow caused to this bigeneration, but the actual climax of the story is a bit disappointing. They just play catch on the helipad. There's just something so low stakes and unsatisfying about this final game. I know it's a callback to the earlier scene of the catching, but I feel like they could have made things a little bit more climactic and also emphasised the Doctor's intelligence to beat the Toymaker. In the original story, the first Doctor outwitted the villain by turning his trap against him and mimicking his voice, completing the trilogic game and escaping right as the Celestial Toy Room disappeared. It was a clever, sneaky way to overcome the odds and turn the tables on the Toymaker. But here it's almost entirely down to chance. The 2 Doctors just goofing around and playing catch with their adversary and hoping he'll eventually fumble. I just really don't like it as a climax, and it's not exactly a showcase of the Doctor's abilities. There's no outsmarting, there's no using the Toymaker's trickery against him and turning the tables. There's just pure luck. The Toymaker is then banished from existence, flattened into a PNG and folded into a box, saving the world. It's fine. I do want to emphasise that I really enjoy Ncuti Gatwa's appearance in this episode. He plays the Doctor so well and his energy is much appreciated. He gets a bit of everything to do in his cameo in this story, having some comedy, some drama, some sadness, every aspect of the Doctor as a character. It's a great showing for Gatwa, who basically spends the whole time wearing no trousers.
I'm gonna eat your legs, Bing!
One of the 15th Doctor's standout moments is after the Toymaker is defeated, and 14 continues to feel guilt for the lives lost, only for 15 to reassure him that it's okay and he can't save everyone. This isn't just about the people the Toymaker killed, this is also about those companions and all the victims of the Flux.
I've got you. Yeah?
It's a really powerful character moment, the Doctor finally being able to process his trauma and heal, able to let go of that weight on his shoulders. He's saving himself in both a literal and metaphorical sense, and it's just such a beautiful moment given the seriousness it deserves. A real feeling of vulnerability and openness from the Doctors, showing that it's okay to process such complicated emotions. There's a similarly touching scene in the TARDIS, the 15th Doctor explaining how his predecessor needs to slow things down and come to terms with everything that has happened to him since he left Gallifrey as the first Doctor. He revisits that idea from earlier that he's just piling more and more on top of him until he crumbles. So that's why he ultimately stays behind with the Nobles and eventually becomes the 15th Doctor when he fixes himself. At least I think that's the implication, instead of them being completely separate people. It's weird and the episode didn't really do a good enough job defining the rules of bigeneration so that we can actually understand what has really happened here. Ironically, they kind of dropped the ball. I really hate how Davis has claimed that every Doctor is bi-generated so they all exist separately and can have their own adventures past their death. I just think that's such a cheap cop-out thing to do. It's wholly unnecessary and actively sabotages the emotion of all the previous regenerations because it implies there are no actual stakes to them. The incarnations all still get to go off in their own timelines or whatever. I get that this is probably his way of being able to justify previous Doctors returning despite their actors being older, but that's never stopped the show before. We had Patrick Troughton and Peter Davison return looking drastically different, and all you need is a brief little throwaway line to explain the difference. Hell, the idea of the Curator was also literally made as a way of bringing old Doctors back without continuity being an issue. So Davis is creating a solution for a problem that doesn't even exist? It just rubs me the wrong way to retroactively remove all consequence and emotion from those regenerations, which were always seen as the ends of eras, goodbyes that kept the show moving forward. To rephrase a classic footballing quote, no Doctor is bigger than the show. And that's my main issue with the bi-generation stuff. It creates yet another David Tennant Doctor who gets to escape traditional regeneration and have his own normal life and adventures. That's something all the others have never gotten, but now David Tennant gets that twice. First there's the Meta-Crisis Doctor living up with Rose on a parallel Earth, and now we have the 14th Doctor who escapes death and gets to keep his own TARDIS living a normal life with the Nobles. I think it just betrays Davis's huge bias towards Tennant refusing to let go of his favourite toy, which is obviously a little bit ironic considering the ending of the Star Beast.
Just let it go.
I know it's implied that he eventually regenerates into 15 with all that baggage finally shed, so that's the main reason I don't think it's some show-breaking thing, but it still rubs me the wrong way and only reinforces the idea of Doctor Who not being able to survive without Tennant.
You don't have to stay forever.
We'll see.
I mentioned earlier that I didn't find the bi-generation thing nearly as bad as the leaks suggested, but things really fall apart when the 14th Doctor gets to keep his own TARDIS. Indeed, he has this huge emotional moment where he explains that he could never let the TARDIS go, and I really think he should have had to let it go, to create a sense of consequence and a sacrifice for the character. It would be so much more powerful on a character level if the Doctor had to give up the TARDIS in order to heal and rejuvenate himself to become the 15th Doctor. But no, instead they just have the 15th Doctor hitting the TARDIS like you smashing that like button, and suddenly there's a fresh new TARDIS for him, with the 14th Doctor getting to keep the original one. Yeah, it's fitting this moment has the Doctor Forever playing, because David Tennant will literally be the Doctor Forever at this rate, because Davis just can't stop himself. And even if you do insist on both Doctors getting TARDISes, you give the new one to 14, rather than him keeping the original TARDIS from the beginning in that junkyard. As it stands, the 15th Doctor, the one moving forward, has to settle for this copy, making him seem less worthy in a sense. I think it's unfair on Ncuti Gatwa to immediately put him in the shadow of Tennant like this. 14 will always be around now and has the original TARDIS, so we're going to be set for like another decade of people asking, where's David Tennant? Because, you know, he's actually still around this time and can actually show up. And yeah, you can already tell certain types of fans are going to delegitimize 15 because of the nature of his introduction and his TARDIS. Davis really made it that easy for them to claim he's not canon. I don't think a line about 15 being older is going to be enough to stop those kinds of people, just saying. I would admit it is cute to see 14 have a normal human dinner party with Mel and the Nobles. I think it's a genuinely sweet moment, I just wish it was under better circumstances. Like, we've rarely had the chance to see the Doctor live like this, having such regular experiences and just being able to hang out with a sense of family. I just wish they would have handled the bi-generation a bit better, so there wasn't such an air of cynicism over the whole thing. Like, this feels like the end of New Who, it's an epilogue to the entire 18-year run. There's a specific divide between the 9th to 14th Doctors and the 15th Doctor onwards, regardless of the eventual off-screen reunification of the two Doctors. It's clear these specials were meant as an ending for the entire period of the modern show, since the 15th Doctor is starting with Season 1. I respect the decision to reset the Doctor's character in this way, and have the 15th Doctor free of all the trauma and baggage of New Who, but I don't see why it has to come as part of an entire soft narrative reboot for them to act like this is 2005 all over again, despite the old era just ending. I know I come off as complaining a lot about this point, and I do want to give them a benefit of the doubt that this approach will eventually pay off. I just think it kind of insults the audience's intelligence to act like new viewers can't jump on at Series 14 because it sounds intimidating. This is a show that refreshes itself constantly and has so many jumping on points already, something the internet makes even easier. I don't know, it's just something I hope won't be nearly as severe of a split as the branding and the writing makes it seem like it will be. Divorced from its ending, I really like the Giggle. I definitely think it's the strongest of the 60th anniversary specials. It's a very simple yet effective setup in the form of the world going crazy, which paves the way for the very strong reintroduction of the Celestial Toymaker, one of the most mythical and fascinating classic Who villains on reputation alone. The Giggle dials up the campiness with the character, but it absolutely works, making Neil Patrick Harris a terrifying and unhinged godlike being using all these powers to play petty games. It's such a good modern interpretation of the character, and his level of threat is perfect for such a climactic special. Unit is also incorporated really well, with such a great headquarters and cast of characters ready for their own spin-off, including Mel being reintroduced and used in a nice way compared to how she was used in classic Who. The editing, direction and music of the story are all also fantastic, making things feel simultaneously like a big world-ending blockbuster and a dramatic character piece exploring how tired the 14th Doctor is. Both David Tennant and Catherine Tate get some fantastic moments showcasing their acting abilities, and Ncuti Gatwa hits the ground running as the 15th Doctor with an excellent range of emotions. Therefore, I think I would give the Giggle an A grade on the specials tier list. It's so well made and has some great moments of continuity, but there are a few little issues here and there, and I definitely think the ending does let it down a bit. The Toymaker is dispatched a bit too suddenly and anticlimactically, suggesting the narrative had too much going on or it needed to be a multi-parter. Then there's also the bi-generation aspect, which I don't hate in theory, but it definitely makes things overly complicated and it's handled in a bad way in my opinion. You know, Davis has tried to fix problems that didn't need fixing and just kind of interrupted the lore even worse than the Timeless Child. But with all of that said, I definitely think the Giggle is a mostly satisfying 60th anniversary special and a strong conclusion to the trilogy, setting Doctor Who up for an optimistic future with the 15th Doctor cleared of baggage and trauma as he gets ready for Series 14. It's an episode with lots of cinematic moments, some solid commentary and a real emotional heart. The ending was a little bit botched in my eyes and sent the wrong message, but I'd still absolutely recommend the Giggle. But what did you think of the Giggle? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time. Bye bye. And I'd just like to thank my Asbantium level patrons, Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Diamond level patron Glenna Clark, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nick Games, and all my Gold level patrons Boots, Daniel Shillito, Franz Orne, Line Vortex, Robert Hock, and Tom Azar. Thank you so much for your support.